Now, my next guest says don't expect to see the same dynamics when members of the committee meet today. Nicole O'Byrne teaches law at the University of New Brunswick, where she specializes in constitutional law, and she joins me now from Fredericton. Nicole, thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome.
So how much power does the Ethics Committee have here?
Well, as a parliamentary committee, they can call witnesses, they can ask the witnesses to submit materials, they can accept written briefs, and basically they can get to the heart of a matter that they think is of importance to the Canadian public.
So in terms of a comparison here, when we're looking at the two separate committees, the Ethics Committee versus the Justice Committee, is there a much wider scope with the Ethics Committee than we saw with the Justice Committee?
Well, the Ethics Committee has to deal with privacy, lobbying concerns as well as the ethical conduct of members. But that is quite a large mandate and can lead into questions such as the lobbying by SNC to change the criminal code and the change that we saw slip through with an omnibus piece of legislation. It can also go to big ethical dilemmas like the one Jody Wilson-Raybould's facing. She's in a situation where, because of privilege, she has not been allowed to tell her whole version of the events that transpired. That's in the public interest. She's actually caught between a rock and a hard place right now because the federal government has refused to waive the privilege for the time period when she's Minister of Veteran Affairs. And she has conducted herself very ethically up to this point, but it has led her into a bind where, in order to tell truth, she might actually have to break an oath as a privy councillor or as a lawyer or break privilege in some way. So the Ethics Committee could actually relieve her of some of that dilemma by asking her to come in, and then she can present her version of events that happen, especially that key component when she was Minister of Veteran Affairs, because of course she resigned when she was Minister of Veteran Affairs. She didn't resign when she was the Attorney General. That's a key distinction.
So essentially, if she is appearing and taking questions then before the Ethics Committee, would we expect to hear the same sort of answers or responses, given how you're saying how careful she's been in conducting herself, or would it be different? Would we get a lot more?
Well, she's already said that she has more materials to submit, and she has told the Justice Committee that she'd be willing to reappear. And of course, the Liberal majority on that committee said, we've heard enough. 4 hours of her testimony has given us enough information. The other committee members disagreed with that, of course, but they've kind of closed the issue on the Justice Committee. Now, with respect to the Ethics Committee, the issue's live again. There's very different people on the Ethics Committee. It's chaired by a Conservative member. The Vice Chair actually broke ranks with the Liberal Party several weeks ago when he said that he supported the call for a full public inquiry on this. So we'll see how he votes. So as we heard in the earlier report, they just need 2 Liberals to go ahead and vote for really what's in the public interest here, and it's getting at the truth, to hear more from Jody Wilson-Raybould and to hear more from Jane Philpott. That's in the public interest. I hope the Liberals on that committee put the public interest over and above their partisan interest with an election coming up in the fall.
Now, you touched on the fact that we know when we're talking about the makeup of the committee, for example, that the chair is a member of the Conservative Party. And although we have seen the vice chair break ranks with the Liberal Party, as you were mentioning there, do you really think that having the chair as a Conservative member will have that big of an impact into how this all plays out?
Well, it matters because the chair recognizes who can speak and in what order. So what we saw at the previous Justice Committee meeting was a motion to adjourn or a motion to go in camera, and the chair, who was a Liberal member, granted that. What we might see today, because we have a member from an opposition party, he might recognize someone else who's going to put forward a motion to say we should call Jody Wilson-Raybould, we should call Jane Philpott. We might even see a motion today calling for more information with respect to the origin of the problem, which was the lobbying by SNC-Lavalin to get changes to the criminal code and introduce the idea of a deferred prosecution agreement in Canada.
Now, a lot of people have had these discussions that have to do with cabinet confidences and waiving privilege. Really, how restricted are these 2 former cabinet ministers given those sorts of confidences that currently exist? How important would it be for the Prime Minister to waive those sorts of restrictions?
Well, I think in the public interest he ought to. And in fact, they waived it via order in council, the solicitor-client privilege issue, for the term when she was Attorney General and Minister of Justice. They just didn't waive it for the time period when she's Minister of Veteran Affairs. which is the key part of this story. We have not heard what happened during her tenure in that office, because that's when she resigned. I would argue that it's incumbent upon the Prime Minister to waive privilege for that period. Now, that being said, there is more information that she can bring to the table. She's alluded to that in public. And then Jane Philpott has also said that there's more to the story and she'd be willing to speak to the committee. So a waiver or not, there's still more information that can come into play here. And the Ethics Committee, I hope there's a motion that goes forward saying that that information serves the public interest and we should all hear it.
And very finally, I just wanted to ask you what you're looking for going forward. We know, for example, that opposition parties have called for a public inquiry. Is that a step that perhaps should be pursued?
Yeah, from the beginning of this, I've supported the idea that there should be a full public inquiry. What we need is an independent third party to assess the credibility of the witnesses, to look at the evidence, to look at the totality of the circumstances, and most importantly, take this out of the partisan realm. We need to actually look at what happened here, and the search for truth, as faulty as it might be in our system, is better facilitated when we have a third party, a judge or a panel of inquiry, looking at the evidence and assessing it, and not partisan people who are advocating their own position in the context of a federal election.
Well, a lot of information to digest here and a lot to continue to watch today as well. We know that we will have coverage of that Ethics Committee meeting and what transpires, and that will be at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nicole.